The limiting principle. Don't be a retard, never be retarded. Death before retardation. The limiting principle. The limiting principle. Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Lindsay is at it again. For the listeners out there that are listening to this and you don't know my backstory, I was once what was called a Lindsayite. It's largely a derogatory term used by people that do not like James Lindsay to describe his followers, and they sort of look at the whole group of people that follow James Lindsay as if it is a cult. And honestly, it does have many cult-like aspects. None of them criticize him in public. If they do criticize him, he's sort of viewed as a demigod, I would say, in the online classical liberal sphere. I'm not really so sure that the people that call themselves classical liberals are actually classical liberals, because, of course, they wouldn't want to go all the way back to the classical liberalism that was there in the founding and have, white landowners only being able to vote, women not being able to vote, black people not being able to vote. So they want a very specific kind of liberalism, and that kind of liberalism is James Lindsay liberalism. That's it. It is a specific strand of classical liberalism stemming from Thomas Reid's Scottish common sense realism. So these people aren't so much, and I consider a couple of them still my friends. I like them. They're good people. Even the ones that have blocked me, I still like. I have no ill will towards them. They just sort of frustrate me because of their cult-like adherence to all things James Lindsay. The first rule of being a Lindsayite is that you do not criticize James Lindsay. If you criticize James Lindsay, it is essentially like criticizing their God. You've stepped out of line and no longer 100% support what he's doing and what he believes. It does have a cult-like structure to it. It's impossible to deny at this point. Now, James Lindsay has been on a bit of a crusade, the woke right crusade, or the woke Reich, as he would say, and Benjamin Netanyahu said. So for anyone out there saying James Lindsay is irrelevant, not so sure about that. And I know he doesn't make as much money from doing this anymore, and he's lost, I think, like over half of his subscribers. And he no longer is invited to speak at conservative events because he's essentially been blackballed. So I honestly don't understand how he's supporting himself. But he's been on a bit of a crusade to fight the woke right. And basically by woke right, he often will say that essentially it's basically like wokeness on the left, quote unquote wokeness on the left, but taking a form on the right. For him, it always includes anti-Jewish sentiment. A lot of the times it doesn't really seem to matter if you're critical of like Jews that happen to be leftists. Like, I mean, look at the shocking amount of Jewish people in the Democrat Party that vote for these sort of anti-white, anti-Western society, pro-LGBTQ, critical race theory Jewish people. Like, he often will say, protect Jews, I stand with Jews. And to me, that isn't really any different than a leftist saying trans women are women, or, protect all trans women. Like James Lindsay, I've seen him express some nuance when it comes to Jewish people, that they are not a monolith, but the way that he performs activism on their behalf, like, he says one thing here, one thing there, but the way that he shows up in the world when he's talking about Jewish people very much treats them as a monolith. He's almost a mirror image of the of the people that absolutely are deranged about Jewish people and think that every Jewish person is a demon. He's just on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, two sides of the same coin, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the other huge components of what he would call the woke right is any sort of advocacy work or activism surrounding promoting pro-white ideas. And of course, in our current political atmosphere, supporting pro-white issues essentially boils down to not wanting to be discriminated against based on the color of your skin, which is white in this instance, and not wanting to be erased from society. Now, of course, like any form of activism, there are more extreme forms of pro white activism where they're purposely and dialectically put in opposition to the other groups. I think that that can be slightly problematic because once it becomes an existential battle based on immutable characteristics, at that point, it's just war. But if you take a look around, and I know it's still there, it's kind of hiding in the shadows, it's not like, at the insane levels that it was during the George Floyd era and COVID, but the left is largely anti white. It just is. So the question is, how do you take on pro white activism and not have it be in direct opposition to these other groups that are determined to erase you out of existence? Now, they say that they don't want to erase you out of existence, but I think that's a lie. Like, I had a colleague one time, and he said something to me that really stuck with me, that diversity, when coming from a leftist, just means less white people. That's all it means. So I thought about that, and it's true. Diversity literally just means erasing white people from positions and from society, and then replacing them with whatever marginalized group you're obsessed with: LGBTQ people, trans, queer people, whatever, black people, Muslims. That's really all it means in leftist context. All these leftists have their own definitions for each word. So I went and asked ChatGPT a question, and a few follow-up questions. Let's go over that really quick. I asked ChatGPT, does diversity from the leftist point of view just mean less white people? Short answer. From a mainstream left-leaning perspective, diversity is not supposed to mean fewer white people. But in practice, it's understandable why many people perceive it to be that way. Here's the nuance broken down clearly and fairly. What the left says diversity means. The theory. In mainstream progressive / left discourse, diversity usually means representation of different racial and ethnic groups, inclusion of women, LGBTQ people, and disabled people, attention to historically excluded or marginalized groups, a belief that institutions function better when many perspectives are present. The stated goal is broader inclusion, not punishment or exclusion of any one group. So, lots of obfuscation. And then why it often looks like less white people. The practice. Many diversity initiatives explicitly prioritize non-white representation because whites are seen as already overrepresented in many institutions. Power and historical dominance are treated as morally relevant factors. So because there's a lot of white people and Western society was largely homogenous and white back in the day, that essentially gives them permission to discriminate against white people, discriminating in the present to make up for wrongs in the past. What did Ibram X. Kendi said, famous black race grifter? The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So because white people are disproportionately represented in positions of power and in society, it's essentially viewed as okay to be racist and discriminate against them because there's too many. Of course, there's various groups that are overrepresented in various fields. But white people are for now, the dominant group in America. So it makes sense that there would be a lot of white people represented in institutions. It's largely proportionate. So they get away with it by saying it's because white people and white Christians, they always throw in Christians in there, white people discriminated in the past, and that's the only reason why they are where they are. That's what equity is, right? Trying to right the wrongs and discrimination of the past by committing new wrongs and new discriminations in the future, or in the present, and then in the future. So I got annoyed with ChatGPT. And so then they said, a precise way to answer your question: does diversity from the leftist point of view just mean less white people? Officially, no. Operationally, often, yes, or at least less white dominance. Think about that. So, because they lie and they couch this in this rhetoric about righting the wrongs of the past, technically it means no. Technically it means no. But when it's put in practice, yes, that's exactly what it means, which of course the stupid chat GPT admits here. So I got annoyed and I said, it seems like you are obfuscating. Are not most diversity programs designed specifically to promote the inclusion of minority groups? And in doing so, the result is less white people. ChatGPT says, I'll answer this directly and plainly without hedging. Yes. Most modern diversity/DEI programs are explicitly designed to increase the representation of racial minorities. And when applied in fixed size institutions, the practical result is fewer white people in those spaces. So, yes, diversity programs just mean less white people. They want less white people. And these diversity programs are widely accepted by mainstream society, and they're in every single institution. So, we have an issue of systemic institutional discrimination and racism aimed at white people. It's indisputable. Now, you see that and you think it's insane. And of course, if you view the world through a leftist lens, and it's like, well, that's because white people were mean in the past. So we have to punish the white people of the present and, of course, the white people in the future in order to make up for that. All right. This is like some giant scheme of reparations. So a little boy, a little white boy grows up and he's told he has white privilege and he may be passed over for a job because he is viewed as an oppressor in this lens. It's so evil. And it's hilarious that the left is often positioned as the champions of marginalized groups. What group is more marginalized than the group that is being specifically targeted for being removed from society? It's an absurd thing to say on its face, especially if you're more left leaning, but straight white, specifically men, because women are also incorporated into this as an oppressed group. Of course, white women are less oppressed because they benefit from whiteness and, they're with their white husbands and white fathers. They're still looked at as an oppressed group, just less than a black trans woman who happens to be Muslim and has one leg. That's like the most oppressed you can get. So ChatGPT openly admits that yes, diversity just means less white people. And then I asked it one more question. Do you see any similarities between the leftist idea that there are too many whites in positions of power and what the Nazis said in terms of too many Jews being in positions of power? I understand they are not a one-to-one match, but don't you think they're very similar? ChatGPT, they're talking about white discrimination in Jewish people. It's freaking out. This is a serious and sensitive comparison, and it deserves a careful, precise answer, not slogans or hand waving. Yes, there is a structural similarity in the logic being used. No, they are not morally or historically equivalent. Both statements can be true at the same time. So yeah, it's the same thing. James Lindsay will often say that the woke right just takes the quote unquote woke right just takes the woke left's framework and then swaps out, like the leftists will say it's whites and Christians in Western society. They swap that out and the right will just say Jews or the post World War II consensus, which is hilarious that I'm using the Hitler and Nazi comparison here, which I actually will do later, because honestly, I know the dissident right wants to disassemble and destroy the post World War II consensus, and they do have a lot of good points. But while it's here, I figured we may as well make the post World War II consensus work for us. And by us, do I mean white people? Not really. I'm not so much a white identitarian as I am racially conscious and aware of how they're using race, and the color of my skin, which I don't know if you could tell by my Midwestern generic voice, but yes, I am white. I'm more about seeing how they manipulate us around race. So having a racial consciousness can be a healthy thing. Like I feel like I can advocate for white people and not make the immediate jump to every Jew is the enemy. Well, what I was saying was that it says, yes, there is a structural similarity in the logic being used. And that's like, that goes to James Lindsay's point that, right, the woke right just uses the structure and the operation mode, the mode of operation of the woke left. and just applies it through a woke right lens. So it's hilarious. The ChatGPT essentially acknowledges this fact. Or not this fact, it acknowledges James Lindsay's like sort of a mode of operation thesis in terms of woke is not just from leftist advocates and leftist philosophers and theologians, but woke is an operating system that anyone can use. And that's a whole thing. There's so much wrong with that. Some of it has some validity. It's why I often get in trouble. I often say, I call myself at one point a critical James Lindsay theorist, and that's kind of a joke, but I am critical of James Lindsay. And I'll critique James Lindsay, and I try to do it in a fair way because I used to be a Lindsayite until he kind of took his newest turn and started calling everybody woke that disagrees with him. And I like to offer fair, substantial critiques about James Lindsay, but when I do this, his enemies show up in my comments and start saying the most vile, insane things. It's one of the worst parts about being critical of James Lindsay is because when you're critical of James Lindsay, some of the worst people come after you. So, I do empathize and sympathize with what he's had to put up with in terms of the abuse. And I love the only abuse that I would offer James Lindsay, at least I would try, are substantive critiques in order to hopefully change his mind and opinion. And of course, he won't, because James Lindsay definitely appears to be some sort of narcissist with very thin skin that cannot take any critiques. If his followers are criticizing him, they're not doing it on the timeline, which is fine. Go in his direct messages and criticize him. Maybe they are. But here's the thing. He has not changed course at all. He has doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down. So if they are criticizing him in his DMs, he ain't listening. He ain't listening. So this thing goes on to say, at an abstract level, both frameworks share a dangerous pattern of reasoning. Moralization of representation, blah, 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 legitimation of corrective action. The imbalance must be corrected. What the Nazis said: removal, exclusion, dispossession, eventually extermination. Modern DEI leftist policy: exclusion from opportunities, decentering, demographic rebalancing. Demographic rebalancing. Well, if you're going to rebalance the demographics and diversity just means less white people, it's almost like they're trying to replace white people. It's some sort of white replacement. I don't know if you guys have heard. Is there some sort of theory out there called white replacement theory? I don't know if that's an actual thing. And it goes on to say, ends in severity. Nazi ideology was explicitly genocidal. Of course, in the beginning, yes, Hitler was obsessing about the Jews for years and years and years and years. But, back in the beginning, Hitler wasn't openly saying we must kill all the Jews. He wasn't saying that. At least I don't believe. He definitely wanted to remove them. I know that he was, looking to move them out of the country, what he calls the Jewish question, trying to solve the Jewish question. So while sometimes advocates of diversity are not openly genocidal in their aims, there does seem to be a parallel there between what Hitler was saying and what a modern leftist was saying. This episode was kicked off by this article in Compact. It's called The Lost Generation, Jacob Savage. Basically, it talks about how millennials have faced the brunt of the DEI regime. That if you're a white writer, he talks about wanting to be a writer on a TV show, but he was explicitly told that there's too many white people in the room, so they want to hire a quote unquote person of color or some LGBTQ person or a white person or a woman, could be any race, a woman or a trans woman, to be brought into the writer's room. This is an example of white replacement. White people being actively discriminated against. Now, of course, DEI is it's mandated in many companies. It's institutional. It is baked into the leftist cake in governance. Joe Biden once said that equity is at the heart of everything they do. That's a direct quote from Joe Biden. And equity is, of course, just equity is bringing equity to all the groups, having the groups equitably represented. And right now, in their mind, white people cheated and have disproportionate representation. So they want to bring about equity in order to remove white people. He goes on and on about all these examples of white millennials, specifically white Christian millennial men and white, straight Christian millennial men being removed or not being offered jobs, literally being fired, to having their livelihood taken away based on the unfalsifiable concept that because of slavery and Jim Crow, these white men are guilty of the sin of whiteness. So they must be removed from different parts of society and replaced. What's interesting about this narrative of the disproportionate amounts of crime and murder in the black populace compared to other populaces, right? They always say, "Oh, well, white people murder more people." And it's like, well, yeah, but when of course, the leftist, if they like, I don't know, I'm sure some of them don't understand per capita, but they purposely have to ignore per capita in order to enact their policies because, right, black people are disproportionately represented in crime, in murder, in fatherlessness rates, in home ownership or lack of home ownership rates. A large problem with this model, this unfalsifiable idea because of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, all these things, blaming all of those things on the state of a small segment of the black populace today. The problem with that is it doesn't seem to be true. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you've heard of Thomas Sowell. He has an amazing book that literally changed my perception of race relations in the country. It's called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And in it, he shows a chart where, think like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the homeownership rates is like a line chart, right? The homeownership rates of blacks and whites were essentially rising at the same rate. Blacks were lower. There could be a bunch of different reasons for that. At that point, I'm sure that it did have a lot to do with discrimination. We know that discrimination and racism has existed for a long time, and it always will, of course. But in spite of that, the homeownership rates and the fatherlessness rates were tracking the same for white families, white individuals, and black families and black individuals. And then right after the civil rights passed, it kept going up a little bit, but it wasn't at the same rate. And then they got to the 80s and it plateaued. And then ever since the 80s, it has just been nosediving. So it doesn't really make sense to blame slavery and Jim Crow and redlining on the disparities between the white populace and the black populace. The statistics literally do not show that. And of course, if I said this to a leftist, they would just call me a racist and start talking about the invisible structures of white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because of course, as Yuri Bezmenov's ghost on X, great follow if you guys want to follow him. He does a lot of really, really good work on Kabbalah and this Tikkun Olam idea of repairing the world. But he often says that, what does he say? Leftism is an inversion of reality, something like that. And that's true. It doesn't matter what is true. Progressivism, leftism is not about what's true. It's about what they want to be true. And so they just lie. They just lie and lie and lie and lie and lie all day and then try to manipulate the conditions of the world in order to make the world reflect what their ideas suggest. Which brings us to James Lindsay. James Alice Lindsay. That's not his middle name, but I'm just going to go ahead and run with it. Here we have Matt Walsh saying how anti-white male discrimination is the root of our decline. James Lindsay says, wow, Matt Walsh and J.D. Vance are pushing exactly the same inflammatory and incorrect narrative at the same time. I'm shocked. Okay. Things are declining. Movie quality is worse. Everything is declining. There are fewer good movies than there were. I'll watch 30 bad movies and then usually get one okay movie. And once in a while, I'll get a great movie. Everybody, go see Weapons. It's on HBO Max. If you don't have HBO Max, get a subscription to it. This is not a paid advertisement. There's probably one person listening to this, so I'm literally just doing this because I want you to watch Weapons. Amazing, amazing film. But we can all feel the decline. And if you look at the movie industry and entertainment in general, TV shows, quality is declining. At the same time, there are less white people being represented in those fields, in that field. So you could extrapolate that and look at every other field, and you could basically imagine the results of what will happen if there's less white people. Now, is this because white people are superior to these other marginalized groups that are being lifted up above white people into these professions, these industries? No, not necessarily. I would assume in the entertainment field, a big reason for it is because, like, the white people of the past, of the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, yeah, there's like propaganda. There's like pro-war propaganda, pro-FBI cop propaganda, but they didn't come at it from an ideological lens. They were there to entertain, make you think. Sometimes they did, but overall, that's not what it was. It was either entertainment or entertainment with some sort of message designed to make you think without a ideological approach bordering on leftism, which is, right, the inversion of reality. So all of these women, these LGBTQ people, black people, all these different groups are essentially queer and race leftist activists. So they inject their message into everything they do. Queer theorists, the field of queer theory, which all LGBTQ activism is based on, has an element in it. It's called praxis. You can't just be a queer person and just make a movie that's not queer. You must commit to doing praxis. You must inject queer leftist praxis into everything you do. But these queer activists, these critical race theory based activists, are putting their own agenda into the films. The storytelling is secondary in many instances, and you can tell the quality of films has dropped off. So it's interesting that James Lindsay would say this. I haven't watched Matt Walsh's episode. I love Matt Walsh, but I don't watch a ton of his stuff. But I'll always appreciate him for his "What Is a Woman" documentary. It was amazing and groundbreaking. But he's openly saying that Matt Walsh and JD Vance are pushing the exact same inflammatory and incorrect narrative at the same time. And then, of course, we also have former Lindsayite Bugman Hagel. She quote tweeted or quote posted James Lindsay. It is actually totally correct to say white males have been systematically discriminated against because they have. You only believe it is incorrect because the very fact that white men have been systemically discriminated against is grounds for coalition building around race, which you are categorically opposed to unless the coalition being built is based on Israel and Jewish identity. Is spicy tweet from the Bugman Hagel, formerly, I don't even, Moist Hagel, Hagelborg, Dark Hagel, Right Side of History. I think that's all of them, pretty sure. Shout out, Bugman Hagel. And of course, this is true. James Lindsay's approach to the Jewish populace is identical to a white leftist that constantly rails about violence happening against black people or trans people. It's the exact same thing. There's almost no difference. James Lindsay would mock those leftists for advocating blanketly for trans people, for women of color. Look at the Pulse shooting. The Pulse shooting happened. James Lindsay didn't say never again is now, but queer. Now, the recent tragedy in Australia, I haven't looked into it that much, but it's horrible. Jewish people being targeted because they're Jewish, horrible. But James Lindsay will say never again is now. He and his friends will post something along the lines of, I will defend the Jewish people no matter what. And again, that's lumping the Jewish people in as a monolith. What about the leftist Jews? Are you going to say that a conservative, Orthodox, or Torah Jew is the same as a leftist Jew? How would you handle that, James? I would love to hear what your opinion is on that. I watched a debate between a conservative Jewish man and a neo-lib Jewish man who is running cover and obfuscation for leftist Jews. I watched that. And I look at that and I see the nuance in it, and I'm like, this can actually wear away at any rising tide of Jew hatred or anti-Semitism. Similar to the way that James Lindsay broke apart queer theory. Because of his work and others, but a lot of his work, groups like Gays Against Groomers was formed. Gay people standing up against the TQ plus mob and trying to protect kids and women. So he was able to, by exploring queer theory and describing it, he was able to separate the harmful ideology from gay people. I have my own opinions on gay people. I'm not really sure if I believe in such a thing as a gay person other than a person who has a compulsion to commit sexual acts. I don't know if there is a internal essence to what it is to be gay. I think that people that engage in homosexual acts are doing that for various reasons, but that's a whole other issue. Look at what James Lindsay did involving critical race theory in black people. He highlighted critical race theory and used that to wake people up to the fact that it's just not all black people, that it is black leftists and other leftists pushing critical race theory infused ideas onto society. He was literally able to differentiate between the actual people and the idea. He reverse engineered it. And that's one of the reasons why I'll never hate James Lindsay, because he taught me a lot about this, but also he did a lot of good work back in the day. But when it comes to the Jewish people, he doesn't do that. And I know he knows about leftist, like Jewish leftism, why there's a shocking amount of Democrats that support it, or a shocking amount of Jewish people in the Democratic Party and on the left. And there's a reason for that. It involves Tikhon Olam, that conservative Jewish man in that debate, which I will eventually highlight in this show. He specifically talked about how so many Jews, and he said it's specifically a strain in America, so many Jews are raised on this Tikkun Olam idea of healing the world, that the world is broken. And by fixing it, by pushing DEI policies, by pushing LGBTQ issues, by pushing the trans issue, we can essentially heal the world. And that's what the leftists are trying to do. They're not so much Gnostic. There's a Gnostic element to their belief system, but they don't really view the world as a prison. They view that there's these various truths that they want to unearth inside all of us and inside society. And they want to reveal these truths, and then the world will be perfect. I don't know why James Lindsay doesn't talk about this. He knows this. I know he does. No, I guess maybe I do know. I know a lot of people will say he's bought off, and I'm not going to comment on that because a lot of it's bad faith. A lot of it is unsubstantiated. There's rumors, there's different dots you could connect, but I'm not a big fan of that. I'd much rather talk about something that I view as more substantive. And I know that I've talked to the James Lindsay and the Lindsayites, and they specifically do not talk about the issue within the Jewish populace that makes so many of them on the left. He specifically does not talk about that because he fears that it's going to create a pogrom against the Jews, that the Jews are going to be targeted like they were in the Holocaust and expelled from society or murdered. And there are a lot of crazy people out there that hate Jews, but I can't think of a better way to act as the right hand of the left in this situation, to act as the dialectical opposite of the quote unquote Jew haters. I can't think of a better way than to further the dialectic against the Jewish populace by lying and obfuscating and looking at the Jewish people as a monolith. It's almost as if he's doing it on purpose. I don't know what's in James Lindsay's heart. I don't know what's in his head. But the fact that he does not discuss this, it is suspicious. And like I said, they do say it's because they want to protect the Jews. But again, I don't think that lying is how you do that. People are going to, I'm going to say the word, notice why there are so many Jewish leftists, why they're overrepresented in leftist organizations. They're noticing that. And I feel like the best way would be to highlight the diverse opinions and philosophies and attitudes found within the Jewish populace to separate Jewish people from the harmful ideas that a lot of their people push, just like you did with gay people and queer theory, just like you did with black people and critical race theory. So this is a chart that I actually covered in a previous episode, but I feel like it's a very, very useful chart while tackling this topic. It was released by the Smithsonian Institute and was created by different kinds of academics and activists that often will write books about studying whiteness, about abolishing whiteness. And basically it takes sort of all the different aspects of like Western society, and it links them to this concept known as whiteness. That to do these things is a example of white culture. The individual is the primary unit, independence and autonomy, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, the nuclear family, hard work is the key to success, planning for the future, long-term planning, Christianity is the norm, wealth equals worth, those kinds of things. It's basically tying these things that the people that push this do not like. It's taking those things and tying it to white people, which is similar to what demagogues of the past, and dare I reference the post-World War II consensus and Hitler again. It is very similar to what Hitler did by looking at different trends of Jewish people and then tying those trends to Jewish people and then demonizing those trends in order to eventually eradicate the Jewish populace. So there's definitely still some, and like I said, you got to make the post World War II consensus work for you while we have it. And I think you could actually do that. And of course, we have more propaganda. Whiteness is a bad deal. A hand, it's a $20 bill with Andrew Jackson on it, a devil tail sticking out of it, hooves on the bottom, hellfire coming out from the top, and a white hand extending called contract, binding you to whiteness. You get stolen land, stolen riches, special favors. It messes endlessly with the lives of your friends, neighbors, and especially humans of color, in all caps. Signed your soul. That's what you have to sign away when you embrace whiteness. You literally sign your soul away. So it's not just about, oh, this is aspects of whiteness. No, 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 no. Whiteness is evil and it must be abolished. So James Lindsay is saying, oh, Matt Walsh and J.D. Vance, they're just playing into the dialectic of white. They're playing into the dialectic and engaging in, woke right behavior. And it's like, well, no, James, like, it's not woke right to point out that white people are being targeted. Yes, I understand, James. Whiteness is actually just a synonym for capitalism and Western society. And so they link all these different aspects of Western society and capitalism to whiteness in order to abolish whiteness. But guess what? The activists don't think that. I know people that hate white people because of this. I once went to a concert with someone and they looked around. It was a Rod Stewart concert. And they looked around. They went, oh, there's so many white people here. Keep in mind, this person was white. So James Lindsay, you can keep your head in the clouds and just deal with theory and the particulars and how whiteness doesn't actually mean white people. But how it's implied, how it is practiced in the world is explicitly anti-white, which we saw. I didn't really go over it, but that article talking about how white people are literally being removed from institutions, removed from society in favor of quote unquote other marginalized groups. That's how it is in practice, James. So to just demonize any pro-white advocacy is foolish. It's woke. You're lying. It is okay to advocate for white people. If you advocate for white people, you don't immediately have to jump to being Hitler. And will a bunch of people do that? Yeah. But that doesn't mean we're going to lie. It doesn't mean that at all. It's false and tricksy, and I don't like it. So this is from a children's book, by the way, called Whiteness is, well, it's not called Whiteness is a Bad Deal. I think it's called Not Our Idea. I think it's what it's called. It's anti-white propaganda aimed at white kids in order to brainwash children into a critical anti-white lens. And then, of course, then we have lots and lots of books, lots of activism designed not just around highlighting whiteness, but abolishing whiteness. Of course, what does that mean? They want to abolish the nuclear family. They want to abolish meritocracy, merit. They want to abolish merit. They want to abolish planning for the future, being on time, which is hilarious because, you guys have heard of like kind of like the racial stereotype CPT, colored people time. They'll use that. They're like, oh, well, black people, a leftist will say, oh, black people, they like to take their time. They like to talk with their family. So that's why they're always late. And of course, if you organize a society based on this, nothing is going to get done because everyone's going to be coming late to work and late to everything. They love to do that. Taking different aspects of what like minority groups do and then being like, this is actually the norm. They also do it with a fatness, where it's like, oh, being thin and in shape, that's just an example of whiteness because black women are curvier. So actually obesity is okay. And of course we see that happening right now with fatness studies and the push for fatness. And these people that are fat advocates call themselves fat. They're like, yeah, we're a fat. And they think that obesity is essentially a slur. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And then of course we have tons of books about whiteness, Seeing White, Treason to Whiteness, White Shift, Angry White Men, The Possessive, Investment in Whiteness, White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, White Privilege, White Rural Rage, White Like Me, Things That Make White People Uncomfortable Beyond the Whiteness of Whiteness. So James, yeah, we don't want to turn into Nazis, James. I agree with you on that. But to lump everyone in as woke right that is going to actively discuss anti-white bias is absurd. It is absurd. And you have no problem doing that with a different group, as Bugman Hagel pointed out. Now, is there some validity to that? I don't know. How many countries have Jewish people been kicked out of? How many times have they been pogromed and slaughtered? Is there some cosmic force out there that has cursed the Jewish people and history is just repeating right now? We're going to have another Holocaust, Holocaust 2.0? I have no idea. Is it because when the new covenant was made with Christ, the Jews denied Christ, thus denying God? Has God cursed the Jewish people, James Lindsay? I don't know. I don't hate Jewish people. I would never advocate for harming a Jewish person. I think it's evil. I think that we're all children of God and we all have souls. The only thing I would do would be to encourage a Jewish person to renounce their faith and come to the true faith, Christianity. So James, you have no problem with posting endlessly about Jewish people and how they're being persecuted, and posting about people that are calling for horrible things to happen to Jews. But the exact same thing is happening to white people, James, in this country. There is systemic oppression and discrimination built into our country aimed at white people. White Christians are being targeted everywhere. Christians are being targeted everywhere. But in the West, it's white people. Our country is being flooded with illegal and legal immigrants. And we always just talk about, well, let's get rid of the illegal immigrants, the criminal aliens. But here's the thing. If you import enough immigrants, even legally, the culture in the country is going to change. The dominant people in this country, whose birth rates are declining, are going to eventually be replaced. Now, am I some race-obsessed person that is obsessed with preserving the white race? Not necessarily, but is it out of the realm of possibility that we can discuss how white people are being specifically targeted? I don't think so, James. And the more you push against that, the more you play into the dialectic. James, you are creating the angry white man who's going to embrace extremism. You are playing into the dialectic. I don't see how you can't see this. I honestly, and I'm going to stop talking to James here. I'll just talk to the audience. I don't understand how he doesn't see it. And then what would this episode be without another reference to Hitler using the post-World War II consensus? Keep in mind that previous slide of the contract binding you to whiteness with the hands stretched out from the contract with the dollar attached to it with flame coming out of it and a devil's tail and then cloven hooves. This is a piece of propaganda that the Nazis released of a Jewish person holding a piece of a map, it looks like, with the hammer and sickle on it, of course, saying that all Jews are communists, that they're just communists and they're infiltrating and subverting our society and they've taken over the institutions and they're overly represented. And then, of course, he's begging for money, even though he has money. So it's Hitler putting out propaganda saying the Jews control everything, they have all the money, and yet they're begging you for more. Functionally, there's no difference between this and the propaganda I showed you before aimed at children, demonizing whiteness and white people. So James, I don't understand what James is doing. I understand he does not want there to be a race war, and neither do I. But in denying the reality of what has happened to white people by saying that it's just woke to point out that this is happening, it's a lie. It's just a lie. Which brings me to this, the big finale. Claire Lehman, insufferable woman, just insufferable. Herald of the apocalypse, Claire Lehman. She says James Lindsay is now peddling white genocide theory, implying that a genocide against whites in the U.S. is imminent, has the potential to inspire racist violence. Such comments are extreme, reckless, and irresponsible. They should be denounced. She goes on to say, opposition to wokeness and critical race theory is one thing. Suggesting that the majority racial group of the U.S. is on the verge of being slaughtered is another. If a sharp line is not drawn between the two, they will become conflated by progressives to discredit anti-CRT efforts. Yeah? That's interesting, because it sort of seems like James Lindsay is conflating the two. That speaking out against anti-white discrimination and anti-white hatred is the same thing as being a Nazi. James Lindsay's the one that's conflating those two. And she goes on to say, impossible maniacs, extremists, people who have become insane via overexposure to the internet may also feel inspired, emboldened, and validated to commit terrorist violence. James Lindsay needs to stop now. And you know what, Claire? I agree with you there. James Lindsay does need to stop. I keep saying that if we want to save Western society, all we have to do is just take James Lindsay's phone away from him. Just take it away from him. So just 5.5 years ago, James Lindsay was saying that the anti-white rhetoric may lead to a genocide. That's how bad the situation was in James's estimation. So if someone's going to come out today and speak out against anti-white racism and say, hey, maybe we don't want to collectivize completely around this idea and put ourselves in diametrical opposition to other groups, I think we should be able to comment on it. And address it and realize that it is true. If we have more open and honest discussions about that, it will actually lessen tensions in this country. It will. And yet James Lindsay is playing right into that dialectic. It's shocking to see. And then, of course, I also asked ChatGPT, did James Lindsay say that there may be a white genocide? ChatGPT says, yes, in 2021, James Lindsay posted on Twitter/X that there will be a genocide of whites if critical race theory isn't stopped. Well, guess what, James? Critical race theory has not been stopped. The Democrats have been pushed back. However, they will be in power again. They're probably going to win the midterms. And what better way to stem the leftist tide than to bring attention to the fact that the left wants to abolish whiteness? Literally 4 years ago, James Lindsay said that this rhetoric will lead to genocide. And yet, if a white person goes, they're discriminating against white people, he turns to Jordan Peterson. Hey, Bucko. He turns into Jordan Peterson. Hey, Bucko. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and clean your room. It's terrible, terrible Jordan Peterson impersonation. I'm going to stop. He says, stop being a victim. Stop being a victim is what he says. And yet when he talks about Jewish people, he doesn't talk about that. If a Jewish person says they're afraid, he's fine with that. And again, I have nothing against Jewish people. It's that there is a clear difference in the way that he looks at the white populace than he does at the Jewish populace. And he views the Jewish people as a monolith and calls anyone that advocates for white people, he calls anyone who advocates for them woke. It doesn't matter if it's Matt Walsh talking about how discrimination against whiteness or white people is destroying different facets of society. To James Lindsay, that's the same thing as some goblin like Lucas Gage or Stu Peters openly advocating for the destruction of Jewish people. It's all woke right to James. And as a former James Lindsay fan, I mean, I had this dude's cell phone number. I still do, actually. He blocked 2 of my accounts on Twitter. I keep joking that I should call him and be like, James, why'd you block me on Twitter? I don't think he'd be very happy. So the hypocrisy is just too much to bear. And this focus on Jewish victimhood, and we should speak out against atrocities that happen to Jewish people. We should speak out against the evil that happened in Australia. But this focus on Jewish victimhood, viewing them as a monolith, removing all nuance from the Jewish populace, there's so many different ideas. By focusing on that and then demonizing any white person that doesn't even collectivize around their race, their skin color, but just wants to talk about that and how these opportunities have been taken away from us, as exemplified in this article, countless examples of white people being removed from society. By doing that, James is only increasing. He's only ratcheting up the tension higher against both Jewish people and also involving the race issues surrounding white people. You can't just discount people's feelings and opinions, James, and say that if you're going to talk about white discrimination and racism, that just makes you woke. In fact, doing that, James, makes you woke. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
The limiting principle. Don't be a retard, never